The rise of a patty empire. This is the story of a $100 million empire built on a single Caribbean pastry, and the man who built it ended his own life inside the factory that made him rich. His name was Lowell Hawthorne. He turned a Jamaican beef patty into the most successful Caribbean-owned business in American history, with more than 120 stores across 9 states, a spot on Undercover Boss, and personal condolences from a sitting mayor and a foreign prime minister when he died. Banks refused him a single dollar when he started. His own family raised the money in $100-a-week installments, passed hand to hand the old Jamaican way. Within 3 decades, that money built a company selling tens of millions of patties a year to supermarkets, prisons, and public schools up and down the East Coast. Then, on a Saturday night in December, with the company still expanding and a $37 million headquarters already in motion, Lowell Hawthorne walked into his own office and shot himself. What actually pushed him there, at the exact moment his empire looked unstoppable? A childhood in the hills of Jamaica. Lowell Hawthorne was born on May 1, 1960, in a small hillside community called Pardner, in the parish of St. Andrew, Jamaica. He was the 6th of 11 children born to Ephraim and Mavis Hawthorne. His father ran a small family bakery, Hawthorne and Sons, which had been feeding the district since 1949. There was no fortune in it, just flour, wood-fired ovens, and long hours, and every one of the 11 children was put to work as soon as they were old enough to help their father knead dough or mind the counter. Being 6th of 11 meant the household ran like its own small economy. Older children looked after younger ones. Everyone rotated through chores at the bakery before and after school. And almost nothing was ever bought that could be made at home instead. Lowell sold guinea pigs and rabbits on the side for pocket money, a detail he would return to decades later when he tried to explain where his instinct for business first came from. The household ran on strict Christian faith, the kind that shaped how the family spoke, disciplined its children, and measured what counted as success. That faith would follow Lowell for the rest of his life, long after the guinea pigs and the hillside bakery were behind him. Through the 1970s, Jamaica's economy went into a prolonged decline, part of the broader turmoil of the Michael Manley years, marked by capital flight, rising unemployment, and IMF-mandated austerity that historians point to as one of the driving forces behind a wave of Jamaican emigration to the United States. For a family of 11 children, the opportunities at home were thinning fast. One by one, the older Hawthorne siblings began leaving for New York, chasing a kind of stability their parents' small bakery could never fully provide. Arriving in New York with nothing, Lowell followed them in 1981, 21 years old, green card in hand, landing in a Bronx that looked nothing like the hills of St. Andrew. He moved in with siblings who had already made the crossing into the borough's growing West Indian pockets around Wakefield and Williamsbridge, and took the first steady job he could find, an assistant stock handler with the New York Police Department. He worked his way up to junior accountant in the department's gun division, a desk job handling paperwork and inventory rather than police work itself, a position he would hold for close to 9 years while studying at night at Bronx Community College to finish his degree. His sister Jacqueline found equally modest work at the city's Bureau of Child Welfare. It was steady income, the kind that paid rent and little else, and none of it looked anything like the future either of them wanted. But something else was happening around Lowell during those years. He watched Caribbean families across the Bronx driving from one borough to another just to find patties and hard dough bread that tasted like home, and coming back most of the time with bodega substitutes that came nowhere close. Nobody had built a real business around that craving yet. Nothing beyond scattered home kitchens and small counters that barely served their own block. By the early 1980s, tens of thousands of Jamaicans, Trinidadians, and Guyanese immigrants had settled across the North Bronx, filling churches, social clubs, and corner stores with a version of home that never quite matched the real thing when it came to food. Lowell noticed that every one of them, no matter how long they had been in the country, still talked about patties the way other people talked about family recipes nobody could replicate outside the kitchen they grew up in. The idea sat with him for years before he acted on it, turned over quietly while he clocked hours as a city accountant. An idea, though, was not money, and money was the one thing every bank in the city refused to hand a young Jamaican immigrant with no collateral and no track record. Launching Golden Krust. In 1989, Lowell sat down with four relatives at a small restaurant on White Plains Road near 233rd Street in the Bronx. His sister Jacqueline, his brothers Milton and Lloyd, and his sister-in-law Velma. All five of them were tired of working for other people and wanted something that belonged to them. Banks had already turned every one of them away, citing the failure rate of new restaurants and the fact that none of them owned enough collateral to guarantee a loan. So they fell back on an old Jamaican savings tradition called a Pardner, where a group of people each commit to contributing a fixed amount on a fixed schedule, and the pooled pot rotates to a different member until everyone has been paid out once. Each of the five put in $100 a week. Combined with money pulled from mortgaged homes, they raised $107,000, enough to open a single storefront. At that same table, the five of them debated a short list of possible names before settling on something that captured the exact texture they were chasing in a perfect patty: Golden Krust. In August of 1989, they opened the first location at 1381 East Gun Hill Road, baking patties in the basement while a small coffee shop ran on the ground floor above them. The response was immediate. Lines formed out the door every Saturday, and customers started driving in from as far as Connecticut to stock up on dozens of patties at a time. First-year sales hit $100,000, fast enough that the family opened a second bakery next door just to handle delivery routes, then crossed the Hudson to open a store in New Jersey. By the end of year 2, Golden Krust had grown to 5 stores and $1 million in sales. None of it came easy. Every one of the 5 founders was still holding down another job in those first months, running the ovens and the register in shifts before and after their regular workdays, unwilling to walk away from a steady paycheck until the bakery had proven it could support their families on its own. Lowell left the police department for good in 1991, once the numbers finally made the decision for him, and became a United States citizen the following year, closing the door for good on the accountant's job that had gotten him through his first decade in America. None of the 5 relatives crowded into that basement kitchen in 1989 could have guessed that the same company, grown 100 times larger, would still be standing on the same block 28 years later, on the night everything ended for the man who started it. Building the machine. Success that fast created a new problem. The little store on Gun Hill Road could no longer keep up with demand from its own customers, let alone new ones. In 1992, Golden Krust secured a $1 million bank loan and used it to open a real production plant in the South Bronx, deliberately placed in one of the most disadvantaged sections of the borough so the jobs it created would go straight back into the community. The new facility could turn out hundreds of patties a minute on assembly lines, flash frozen and shipped out across the city, a staggering leap from the few hundred a day his father used to bake by hand back in Jamaica. That capacity mattered, because Golden Krust was about to land contracts most small food companies never come close to seeing. In 1995, the patties entered the New York City school lunch program, putting the family recipe in front of tens of thousands of children who had never set foot in the Bronx and had no idea where it came from. Around the same time, Rikers Island began serving them to inmates, eventually consuming more than 50,000 patties every single month. By 1996, 17 Golden Krust locations were operating across New York City, and the company made a decision that would define its next chapter. It became the first Caribbean-owned business in the United States ever granted a franchise license, a move few minority-owned companies attempted at the time because of the cost and legal complexity involved. The first franchisee, a Jamaican-born businesswoman named Hillary Herbs, and shortly after her, Earl Chin in Brooklyn, opened outlets that proved the model could work outside the family's direct control. By 1998, the Bronx plant alone was producing 25 million patties a year, and Golden Krust had officially outgrown its reputation as a neighborhood bakery. That growth was about to pull in more attention and more ambition than any of the 5 founders had planned for. $100 million company. The franchise engine kept running through the 2000s. By 2003, Golden Krust had grown to 75 stores across 5 states and was pulling in $16 million a year. Still a family-run business at its core, with 9 of the 11 Hawthorne siblings actively working somewhere inside it. Franchisees paid an initial fee of roughly $20,000, plus a percentage of profits back to the parent company, a structure simple enough that nurses, teachers, and first-time business owners with no restaurant experience could realistically buy in, which is exactly who most of them turned out to be. Management set a public target of 250 stores within 5 years, which meant opening roughly 3 new locations every single month. The company even signed former NFL running back Tiki Barber for a national campaign tied to a new combo meal partnership with Pepsi, putting Golden Krust on billboards, buses, radio, and television across its markets. That exact expansion pace never fully materialized, but the growth was real all the same. Georgia, Florida, Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, North Carolina, and Philadelphia all got their first Golden Krust locations before the decade was out. In 2011, the company pushed into an entirely new channel, launching a frozen, microwavable patty line into mainstream supermarkets, landing shelf space at Walmart, Target, Publix, and Costco, and eventually reaching more than 20,000 retail locations nationwide. That same year, Golden Krust crossed $100 million in system-wide sales for the first time, 22 years after 5 relatives raised $107,000 in a Bronx cafe. The frozen line alone pushed Golden Krust's products into 30 states, far beyond the 9 where its actual restaurants operated, meaning millions of Americans who had never set foot in a Golden Krust storefront were now eating Lowell's family recipes straight out of their own freezers. By the mid-2010s, the company had grown to more than 120 locations across 9 states, employed roughly 1,800 people, and stood as the largest Caribbean-owned franchise chain in the country. It was a title nobody else in the category was even close to challenging, but it said nothing about what was quietly happening inside the family running it. Faith, family, and quiet battles. None of that growth erased how personal the company still was underneath the numbers. By 2016, 11 Hawthornes, spanning siblings, spouses, and Lowell's own children, held roles inside Golden Krust, spread across manufacturing, franchising, retail, and legal counsel. Lowell had married Lorna years earlier, and together they raised 4 children, several of whom worked their way up inside the family business rather than starting at the top, including a son named Omar, who became director of franchise and community development. Lowell credited his Christian faith, inherited straight from his parents' household in Border, as the foundation of every major decision he made, a theme he returned to constantly whenever he spoke publicly about the company, alongside a rigid personal routine of being home for dinner every night and in church every Sunday, no matter how demanding the week had been. He also sat on the boards of several community organizations, including the Caribbean American Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and chaired the American Foundation for the University of the West Indies, and became a sought-after motivational speaker in his own right, telling the Golden Krust story at conferences and universities as proof that the American dream still worked exactly the way immigrants were told it would. The road there had not been smooth. Around 2008, he survived a serious aneurysm that friends later described as a turning point in how seriously he took his faith. In the company's early growth years, he also faced extortion attempts from organized crime elements looking to profit off a fast-growing immigrant-owned business, a threat he managed to outlast quietly, without it becoming public knowledge until much later. In 2005, he established the Mavis and Ephraim Hawthorne Golden Krust Foundation, named for his late parents, which began funding scholarships for students in both the United States and Jamaica, eventually awarding hundreds of them over the following decade. In 2012, he published a memoir, The Baker's Son, tracing the whole arc from a childhood selling guinea pigs in rural Jamaica to running a 9-figure American company, and framing all of it as a testament to faith and family, rather than personal ambition. Jamaica awarded him the Order of Distinction, Commander rank, in 2014. In 2016, CBS featured him on the Emmy-winning series Undercover Boss, disguising himself and working alongside his own employees for a week. On paper, it read like a man who had already survived every obstacle standing between him and the American dream. Paper, though, only ever shows what people choose to put on it. The pressure nobody saw. That same year, Golden Krust bought 18 acres of land in Blauvelt, New York for $3.1 million and announced plans to build a $37 million headquarters and distribution center there, easily the single largest investment in the company's history. It was meant to be the next great leap forward, a physical monument to how far the business had come from a basement kitchen on Gun Hill Road. Behind that announcement, though, Lowell was privately carrying a tax debt that had been building for years, more than $150,000 owed in city and state taxes alone, and a growing fear that the federal government was preparing to investigate him for evading far more than that. At the same time, a proposed class action lawsuit from more than 100 current and former employees was moving through federal court in Manhattan, alleging he had failed to pay them proper overtime for years. None of it showed on the surface to the people around him, and by most accounts not even to many of the relatives working alongside him every day. A longtime friend and Golden Krust franchisee later described Lowell as someone who treated every setback as temporary, a man who always insisted they would find a way through whatever crisis hit next, and usually did. In late November of 2017, he posted publicly about a new store opening in Houston, another marker of growth on a resume that already had plenty. Weeks earlier, he had celebrated the birth of his first grandchild, telling friends he was looking forward to a new phase of life centered on his children and grandchildren rather than the business. Every visible sign, right up until the very end, pointed toward a company and a man still climbing. December 2, 2017. The version friends and franchisees saw in public was not the version his own family was quietly living with behind closed doors. Hours before it happened, relatives noticed him acting strangely, talking to himself, distracted in a way that alarmed the people who knew him best. A family member later told investigators that he had finally admitted the full scale of his tax debt to relatives that same day, after years of carrying it largely alone. That Saturday evening at the company headquarters on Park Avenue in the Bronx, security cameras captured him in his office speaking with two employees. When the conversation ended and they walked out, Lowell was alone in the room. He shot himself with a single gunshot. One of the two employees who had just left the office immediately called 911. His younger brother, Milton, one of the four original relatives who had raised the founding money with him in 1989, was the family member who met police officers when they arrived at the plant that evening. Lowell Hawthorne was pronounced dead at 57 years old, leaving behind a note addressed to his family. Company spokesman and nephew Stephen Clark confirmed the loss to reporters gathered outside the Bronx headquarters within hours, saying the family was still trying to process what had happened. Word reached New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr., and Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness the same night, and each of them issued public statements mourning a man they described as a pillar of his community. All three of New York's major daily papers ran the story within 48 hours, most of them chasing the same question the family itself could not fully answer. A wake was held at a church in Mount Vernon on December 18th, followed by a memorial service the next day at a Brooklyn megachurch large enough to hold the crowd that came. The funeral closed one chapter of the Golden Krust story. What happened to the company itself was still an open question. What the family chose to do next. Within a week of his death, some of the same employees behind the wage lawsuit filed new claims, this time against his estate. The $37 million Blauvelt headquarters, his final major project, was quietly shelved and left untouched for years. The land eventually sold off in 2022 for $6 million, a fraction of what the company had once planned to build there. But the larger decision facing the Hawthorne family had nothing to do with real estate. It was whether to sell the business, bring in outside owners, and let a company built by immigrant siblings and a $100 a week partner draw disappear the way so many founder-led businesses do after a tragedy like this one. They chose not to. His son Darren Hawthorne became president of the restaurant division in February 2018, barely 2 months after his father's death. His sister Lorraine kept running the company's administrative side, a role she had held since Golden Krust's earliest days in the 1990s. By 2024, leadership had formally passed to his sister, Jacqueline Hawthorne Robinson, one of the 5 original relatives who had sat around that table on White Plains Road back in 1989, now serving as chairman and chief executive officer of the company her brother started. Under her, Golden Krust did not shrink. It kept expanding, a retail partnership with Walmart that grew into a dedicated Island Select product line by 2026. a new location inside JFK Airport in 2025, a farewell partnership with New York's Transit Authority as the old MetroCard was phased out, and in December of that year, a 5-year plan to open 50 additional restaurants across the country. That same season, the company funded a relief initiative for Jamaican farmers devastated by Hurricane Melissa, financed by profits from a business Lowell started with $107,000 borrowed dollars and a refusal to keep working for somebody else. He never saw any of it. The patties he first baked in a basement on Gun Hill Road in 1989 are still rolling off the line today, 35 years and counting, in a company that never stopped belonging to his family, even after it stopped belonging to him. His family kept the company instead of selling. Would you have done the same? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.